Hi everyone, welcome to the GXM podcast. We explore news and topics around video game music and the intersection between the games and music industries. We aim to publish fortnightly, so please be sure to subscribe. My name's Tom Quillfeldt. I work for game soundtrack label Laced Records and podcast with the Cane and Rinse crew. Joining me is Mat Ombler, who has interviewed lots of game composers, music artists and others as a journalist for outlets including the NME, Washington Post and Wired, and he now works for Laced as head of music and game partnerships. What obscure cover band, arrangement album, Japanese deep cut have you been digging out this week?
I finally caved and bought Baldur's Gate 3.
Hey!
Which is genuinely one of the best games I think I've ever played, and I must be about 20 hours into it. So that's been pretty much it. I've just been busy with loads of work stuff, but we did have something cool planned for the weekend. Me and a couple of lads went down to see a band called the 900s, who are basically the only official Tony Hawk's Pro Skater cover band, endorsed by the Birdman himself. I think when they were in London playing a gig, there's a video that went viral, loads of publications picked it up, of him just joining them on stage and just singing Goldfinger's Superman. So it was a really, really cool gig. They played two 45-minute sets, pretty much back-to-back, like, relentless bangers just from the entire Tony Hawk's Pro Skater catalogue from One to American Wasteland. And the chops on the vocalist, do you know what I mean? To cover all of the songs that are in those games, like the vocal range from Dead Kennedys to Goldfinger, Suicidal Tendencies, Papa Roach, even Public Enemy, he absolutely smashed it. So yeah, came out of that pretty drunk on the Saturday evening, and then spent the entire Sunday just rotting playing Baldur's Gate, which was the best way to struggle through a hangover. What about you?
So I finished SteamWorld Dig 2 with the kids. Wonderful game, lovely fitting soundtrack as well, and we're diving straight into Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which of course Gareth Coker scored and is a firm favourite score. And he did the concert. Gosh, was it last year? Might have been the year before. Can't remember, the Game Festival concert.
Yeah, that would have been the year, but last year before now.
Of the music of Ori, and that was beautiful as well. He's a fantastic composer. I've been playing a puzzle game, a sort of set on an island puzzle game, I guess, in the legacy of Myst, the game called Call of the Sea, which is a sort of set in 1934, and it's got that kind of pulpy, kind of mysterious island, and I won't spoil anything beyond that because it's eminently spoilable, but that has a pretty nice soundtrack, very appropriate for the game. I wouldn't say it's sort of the whole thing bowled me over too much, but my wife and I have been enjoying that. So yeah, still not struggling to get back to God of War Ragnarok, but and also I still need to dig into that soundtrack. I sort of loved the 2018 soundtrack, Bear McCreary, and the Ragnarok soundtrack. It sort of builds on it in quite a mature and subtle way. It has got some bangers, boss bangers, towards the end of the score, but it's very layered soundtrack. So I'm still kind of working on that as well, and just actually listening to a ton of stuff. I can't even remember what, but just I must have 70 open video game music album playlists of ones that I'm trying to check out, actively
70.
listen to any. Yeah. I've got a whole numbering system. There's number one, give it as a first listen, don't do anything with it. Number two is where I'm noting every track and sorting them into playlists. And number three is if I'm only tangentially interested, so I'm just going to give it a smash through. And then number four is if I've done with it and it needs a last listen to kind of seal the deal. I've got this insane iTunes, Apple Music system that I've had for 15 years or something, insane, since digital music was about, really, on PC.
That is
it's a sickness, is what it is.
That is so different to my ADHD rampage of just open up a soundtrack on YouTube, skip at random intervals until something catches my attention, and if it doesn't, just sack off the soundtrack and never listen to it again.
Well, I tell you what, I was reading Pierre's newsletters, and the problem is he highlights so many good albums, I can't absorb them all every time. So I did do that this time. I was like, open up Spotify, listen to just tiny bits, jump in and out, and kind of get the hang of it and see if it's worthy of becoming a number one or a number three. And then number two is reserved for like soundtracks I'm really chewing on, like still listening to Chia. Anthony John Agnello, who joined us on GXM 10, got me to revisit Silent Hill 3 and 4, and he sort of gave me the instruction to listen to them just as trip-hop albums rather than game soundtracks. So I'm still nearly done with those. They're on number 4. They're on their way out of the of the system. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And then I haven't checked out the Return to Monkey Island, the sort of Peter McConnell and co. throwback for the new game, which is also a sort of throwback game as well. But so much to listen to, and all new stuff coming in all the time. It's insane, absolutely insane.
Too many albums, too many
good albums. The quality is just it's getting to me, you know. It's getting to me. It's starting to like play on my mind. It's like I don't have enough life to listen to all of this great music. So yeah. Let's get on into the news. So I just as we were about to start recording, I just caught Ethan Gatch, the senior reporter at Kotaku, was tweeting out that Epic Games is laying off roughly 50% of Bandcamp staff amidst the sale to Songtrader. So that's obviously a sad and pretty big story. It's not in an official news piece yet, so I guess we'll probably... Bing! So this is Matt and Tom binging in. We've got the full story now, which is the Bandcamp, which is a pretty important digital music store especially for indie game composers, but also lots and lots of different indie artists and veteran composers of older games, sort of reselling popular soundtracks, but also it's being sold by Epic Games, of course. So Bandcamp is being hit with about 50% staff layoffs as it is sold to the business-to-business music platform Songtrader. And unfortunately, we've just learned that the 8 sort of negotiating members of the Bandcamp United Union have also been offered redundancy, or not offered their jobs back, basically, which is a little suspicious. But we're very sorry for all those people laid off. We hope that as many of them as possible land on their feet. Comes amid a lot of layoff news from games industry, music industry, I'm sure plenty of other industries at the moment. Bing! Matt, Riot Games, we were talking about KDA and stuff in recent podcasts. I saw this and I was like, that's brilliant. That makes so much sense. What are they doing?
This is a really major announcement. Riot Games has revealed a new virtual band comprising characters from their very popular game, League of Legends. The band is called Heartsteel. It's a boy group, and it features reimagined versions of beloved League of Legends characters such as Ezreal, Kayn, Aphelios, Yearn, Xante, and Set. I'm aware, as somebody who doesn't play League, I have probably absolutely butchered those character names, so do forgive me, any League fans that are listening. But yeah, I dived into this just to kind of learn more about the real artists who are in this group, because I wasn't aware of any of their names. Bacon, who is one of the main members, he's also in the K-pop group EXO and Super M. He is very popular. 2.5 million monthly listeners on Spotify, 3.6 million on YouTube, and a whopping 22 million Instagram followers. The rest of the band, you've got Carl Scrubby, an LA-based rapper. You've got Urzi. Again, I believe I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He is a producer, singer-songwriter, and performer who is really big in China. He's done a lot of Mandarin music. And then finally, there is Toby Liu, who is an artist raised in Chicago but born in Nigeria, who fuses elements of hip-hop, R&B, and pop with undeniable melodies. And what are League of Legends songs best known for? Their undeniable melodies. So yeah, just to wrap all of those numbers together, between just those 4 people in the group, they have combined numbers of 7 million monthly listeners, 4.5 million YouTube subscribers, and 23 million Instagram followers. Riot pushing this through its own channels, obviously massive numbers there, but just getting this caliber of artists involved and having them in the group. And like Riot always, it's the same way they do these anthems, right? Whoever they choose to do them, they always have that quintessential Riot sound. So their first single, it's not out yet. All they've done so far is announce the actual reveal of the band. Their first new song, Paranoia, is out October 23rd. So I am very much looking forward to listening to that.
So this isn't a K-pop band. It's fronted by a K-pop member, and I'm sure the music will be in that realm. But this is a really international crew of performers. What's in it for the lead guy, Baekhyun?
Yeah,
who's a big star in their own right. Presumably, he and his team want to promote him as a solo artist, and outside of the groups that made him big, maybe. I'm just speculating here. What's in it for him? Obviously money, but what's in it for him in terms of subsuming himself into a virtual band, you know, having an alternative name? It won't be him in person in the videos. I'm just curious, like, what's in it for a big star already to become pseudonymous?
I would guess one, as a K-pop artist, massively expand his reach in the West. Because, yep, K-pop music is already big in the West, but it's nowhere near as big as it obviously is in Korea. 2, probably a really cool creative project to embark on, just in terms of everybody knows how successful KDA have been, everybody knows how successful Mave are now, Netmarble's group. So we've got all of these virtual groups popping up. It's a cool project to work on. And 3rd, I'd just say the sheer numbers they can reach. I mean, if you look at the numbers for the last Worlds tour, I think that's pretty much on the same level as Super Bowl now in terms of viewing numbers. It's up there with the Game Awards as well. Obviously, that's only going to grow and get bigger. And when you look at the production that goes into... I always say to people, like, when people get curious about what we do and you kind of have to describe video game music and all of that kind of stuff, like, and video games, like, not are they still popular, but you know what I mean? Like, how popular is video game music? I always show those people videos of the League of Legends finals where they have these massive music performances beforehand, and all of the money that goes into production for those. It's just the same as like a Madonna concert or like Taylor Swift. Do you know what I mean? Like, the production is like off the charts. As soon as you're like putting money into making a virtual dragon that comes in through a green screen or whatever technology they're using, like an AR dragon, do you know what I mean? That's where you know the money's there. So I think, yeah, a combination of reach, a cool creative thing to do, and ultimately, I guess, domination, do you know what I mean? Like, Riot Games is massive. And speaking of things, all things music and things that used to be massive, everybody remembers and loves, I think it's fair to say, Guitar Hero, and a recent kind of, not an internal employee meeting, which featured, of all people, James Corden speaking alongside Bobby Kotick. Do you want to just tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it was an internal employee meeting. I don't know why James Corden was there, presumably just to help cheer everyone up. I don't know how well that went, but talking about the future of Activision, obviously this is in context. At the time of recording, Microsoft have just fully acquired Activision Blizzard King, which presumably helps Activision to make some sort of slightly more ambitious future plans, potentially for other franchises that aren't Call of Duty or World of Warcraft or Candy Crush. So yeah, Kotick was quoted saying the re-emergence of Guitar Hero and other things, whatever those are, would not be possible without the different types of resources, whatever that means. And so, just the endless possibilities for the future that are just incredibly exciting. The point being that he's sort of teasing, using Guitar Hero as the lead teaser to say, look, there's some other IPs that can come back now that we've presumably done this big, acquisition. So we had Guitar Hero Live, was it 2015, Matt? They sort of tried to revive it with a sort of live action footage. By all accounts, was an okay game, but it didn't retake off, did it?
No.
What do you think needs to happen if they bring it back again? Are the guitars coming back? Are the plastic instruments coming back? Is it VR, leading on VR, like stealing some of Beat Saber's thunder? Or what can they actually do to cut through and revive the brand, do you think?
I think the guitars need to come back, because that was the thing, right? There was the whole, even everything from the whammy bars on the guitars and lifting them up to activate that overdrive mode and going full-blown rock star. Like, the plastic instruments, as cheap as they felt and as cheap as they probably were to make in most cases, like, I think they were like a fundamental part of the game. Do you know what I mean? Like, you couldn't, I don't think you could bring Guitar Hero back and do it as a VR thing. I just think, one, you'd price people out just because of how expensive the headsets are, like the Meta ones and the PSVR ones. I think it needs to be plastic instruments make a comeback. But I was thinking about how you do this, because it's important to remember, right? Rock Band, which was Guitar Hero's main competitor, that's still going. There's new songs coming out for that every week, because the model for that now is basically they just constantly release new music. And they've got a storefront, you can go into the game and you can download music.
So that's Rock Band 4, which was also released in 2015, I believe. And that runs on PS4, Xbox One, which of course are forward compatible with PS5, Series X. So Rock Band 4 is still a live platform, you're saying?
Yeah, and then at the same time, you've got the Guitar Tuition game from Ubisoft, Rocksmith, and that is similar kind of thing, like Guitar Simulator, but it's more of an educational thing as well. So you've got these two big games going, and I'm not saying they're bigger IPs than Guitar Hero, because they're absolutely not. I think there's a lot of brand equity in Guitar Hero, but I just think they need to do it and do it right. One interesting suggestion, this came from Liam Robertson on Twitter, who most people know as contributing to the Did You Know Gaming channel. He simply tweeted, here's what you do with Guitar Hero, create a new one and start selling the guitars again with the old design from 1 to 6. Put all the previous Guitar Hero games on Game Pass and make them compatible with the new controller. Periodically add new Guitar Hero games to Game Pass.
It's like a remaster plus platform. I mean, that is what people say about every IP they want to see come back a lot of the time. They're just like, just put all of them in one collection and give us all of them at once, and then also keep adding new stuff. The thing I can't get past, though, is surely the investment needed to manufacture the physical Guitar Hero, that's just a lot of money. And okay, they're now getting into Microsoft money, but Microsoft need to make their 70 bill back, and that they're banking on Call of Duty, Candy Crush, and World of Warcraft. So how do you stop Guitar Hero being a loss maker if you're trying to get these quite expensive to produce peripherals back?
You get Bobby to send an email to the heads of Oxfam charity shops, issuing an instant callback for all the plastic Guitar Hero peripherals they have inevitably picked up from over the years. Send them all back to Activision HQ, bundle them back up. But Bob's your uncle, there you go. I don't know. I'd assume there's probably a cheap way of doing this. I mean, even if you put the game itself on Game Pass and then maybe sold the guitars, but then as well, I guess you've got the logistics of shipping
and licensing all that music again.
Licensing thing is the one thing that's interesting, because I know from reading that quite a lot of bands did not get paid much to feature in those games, because you've got to remember, until it blew up, it was very much a new thing. And then I think once Guitar Hero became like a worldwide phenomenon, I remember Herman Lee from Dragon Force saying something about this, which was one of the hardest songs on the game, Through the Fire and the Flames. He basically said he was paid peanuts for having their song in Guitar Hero, and then you look at the amount of copies that Guitar Hero has sold, the franchise, and like I always say, as a mark of how popular something is in pop culture, as soon as South Park has made an episode about it, that's when you know you've kind of reached the world domination phase.
It should be mentioned that a lot of what money makes it back to artists from certain types of deal depends on their deal with their record label.
Yeah.
If they're still unrecouped, or if they're unrecouped on that particular album, for instance, it might be that, a sync fee like that would just get sort of swallowed up, or just go straight to the label, essentially. I don't know. I'm just, but it is worth mentioning there's a middleman there. It's not the Guitar Hero company paying the artists directly. Yeah, it's tricky. It is tricky. I would suspect they'll do something smaller. They'll soft launch something without a big expensive plastic instrument. But you can't, like you say, you need the guitar. Is there a way to slim down the controller, have it not be a big bulky plastic thing?
If you look at what Nintendo did, where they just put the Wii controller inside of a plastic peripheral. As someone who doesn't manufacture like peripheral accessories, it's hard to say, right, in terms of knowing how much these things cost, but I can't imagine it's too expensive. It's just like, if you can put the controller in it and it's essentially just picking up an input, in the same way you can buy like a cheap MIDI input thing off Amazon or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Because that's all it is, right?
People are used to sticking their Joy-Cons and stuff in plastic crap, and I've got the Ring Fit tension ring, which is actually very high quality, but it's costly. So I don't know. We should move on. Matt, what is? Oh no, more K-pop. We'll just turn into a K-pop podcast, honestly. What's happening in Overwatch 2?
Overwatch has now adopted a live service model. It's now a free-to-play game. Like other live service free-to-play games such as Fortnite, it relies on regular collaborations with well-known IP to bring new players in. In this case, it is a collaboration with the K-pop group LE SSERAFIM. They're a 5-member girl group who debuted in May 2022 with the single Fearless. They've been a huge success in Korea and Japan, as well as internationally. We now know that the group and Blizzard, who develop Overwatch, are working together for a video for LE SSERAFIM's next single, which is going to be called Perfect Night, and that is coming out on October the 26th, so expect a lot of Overwatch-themed stuff in the background of that video. We also know that the collab is going to involve a LE SSERAFIM-inspired custom game mode. We don't have any more details on that yet, but we're eager to see it. And we also know that, as you might expect, there are going to be plenty of exclusive in-game cosmetic items to purchase, like hero skins. The skins in Overwatch are generally quite expensive for the legendary skins, which these skins are going to be $19 per skin. So it'll be interesting to see if they do something discounted for the entire group, of which there are 5 members, or if they're expecting fans to part way with $19 for each skin, which could end up being quite expensive for a lot of people. But hey, it's K-pop. People are willing to spend money on it.
Indeed. But it comes at a time, actually, Overwatch 2's had a little bit of bad press, hasn't it, for Diablo 4 skin and pricing and stuff. That said, I'm sure there's still plenty of people enjoying it, and these kind of collabs keep happening, so they must be a win-win for the game makers and for the bands involved, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. K-pop collaborations have always performed well in gaming. That's why there's so many of them happening right now. We will just have to wait and see if this collab specifically goes down as well as previous collabs in the likes of PUBG Mobile, Fortnite and Garena. Will Overwatch fans be into this? Probably, maybe. I'll be keeping an eye on Twitter and all social media platforms to see how they're responding, because Overwatch fans in particular seem to be very vocal when they like and dislike stuff.
That's one way to put it, yeah. Cool. Well, we'll maybe check back in later if this turns out to be a bit of a trailblazer. Do you like sea shanties, Matt?
I love a good sea shanty.
Excellent. Well, you may remember the Scots TikTok star Nathan Evans. Was it the it's not the weather, is it the Weatherman?
Yeah, that's it. Here come the Weatherman. Yeah.
Is it the Weatherman or is it
Weatherman?
Wellerman.
Wellerman.
Yeah. He's got a new space shanty song in Starfield, which is a surprise to me, but it sounds awesome. He hit the top of the charts with his version of a 19th century shanty, went viral around the world, and people were doing kind of collab videos with his original video on TikTok, and that was a big moment for that platform in the West. Apparently, he's recorded several songs for Starfield because Bethesda reached out to him. He's a big gamer. Fans have sort of discovered this, and it seems like a really kind of clever, win-win, funny, memeable kind of idea, I guess. What do you reckon?
I thought, just because of how big he was, I thought this is something we would have heard about, not months in advance of the game coming out, but you know what I mean, at least a couple of weeks. But then I guess as well, as far as like Bethesda is concerned, it's like, why would you want to put all the focus on a viral TikTok star, right? No matter how good the music is, ahead of like actually promoting the game's features and stuff. But I'm glad to hear about it, because it's just, I like to see it when studios do interesting stuff, and the whole just exploring space as a pirate or whatever else and singing about that. And rather than the lyrics of the songs being like quite upbeat, just being quite bleak and desolate, you know what I mean, about like exploring the voids of space. I thought that was funny.
The nice thing it seems to be, I'm sad I didn't know about this, is that he lent his voice to one of the characters, one of the captains of a spaceship. And so it's all kind of diegetic. That's in class. World. I mean, that is the way to do it. And I think maybe they just wanted people to discover it.
Yeah.
And not make it a big thing, and let people find it out for themselves, which is, you know, that is the brave, and I guess you create more of a moment that way, in a sense. It's a bit like Elden Ring with, you know, certain things that, or Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, where they didn't put certain elements of those games in the marketing, and so when people discovered them for the first time, they were like, whoa, what is this crazy thing? That then spreads by word of mouth, and it becomes a lot more kind of meaningful to those people.
A nice little surprise, a nice pirate surprise.
Yeah, there might be more in Starfield that we don't know about.
Just loads of viral TikTok stars just hidden throughout the game, just all with their own ships.
Well, I just like, you know, it could be like a totally left field, like Rod Stewart or something.
Yeah.
It's like Rod Stewart's on the far end of the map. He's like this pirate who's gone insane and floated off into space, and his ship doesn't work, but he's still alive at 150.
I'd love that.
Building little train sets in his... Right, anyway, Matt, last thing, another game, another of these big games, big service games, another big collaboration.
Post Malone has teased an Apex Legends collaboration. It is, when I say tease, I mean literal tease. It was via a short video through his social channels, about 15 seconds in length. All we know is that a collaboration event is coming November 7th. Post Malone is a massive gamer. Like, he loves video games. Really big Apex Legends player as well, so it's cool to see this. He has previously collaborated with the Pokemon Company to write a song that was branded Pokemon. You can find the video out there. We'll put it in the description as well. Other than that, he owes Guitar Hero for being why he picked up a guitar and started playing. So he's always been a gamer, and I've always been kind of sitting here thinking, when's someone going to sweep him up and do something cool? And for Apex Legends to get that, that's great, because honestly, he's such a massive Apex Legends player. I think that's the game that he streams the most on his Twitch channel. So I'm excited to see how they're going to do this. I don't know if it's just going to be a in-game thing where he's maybe brought in as a character, or could this be Apex Legends trying to do their own version of an in-game concert? Like, I don't know. What do you think?
It's interesting because we've talked a lot about Fortnite. We've talked a lot about certain games, League of Legends. Apex Legends hasn't come up that much in conversation about these collaborations and things, but it's one of the biggest names in service games, certainly in the West. There's been so many of them, these things, and they sort of dominated our news section for quite a while. It would be really cool to find out what's in it from the artist's perspective to get involved, especially with these big service games. Everyone's doing it. Everyone keeps re-upping, and League of Legends is going very, very heavy of all of them. Put the most money into it and stuff like that. So we'll keep a tab on it. So, our interview today, tying in slightly to the timing of the release of Lords of the Fallen, which came out on October 13th, I spoke to Cris Velasco, who's one of the two composers on the game. Laced Records is putting out the vinyl and has already put out the digital soundtrack for Lords of the Fallen, so I've been working on that project for a couple of months. So it wasn't hard to sort of get a line to Cris because we were talking to him about the release and everything. But for this interview, I thought that it would be funny because he worked on a game called Fae Farm almost at the same time, or pretty much at the same time as Lords of the Fallen. And Fae Farm is just this cozy, colourful, pastel kind of, child-friendly game where you're growing things and getting to know people. And Lords of the Fallen is about going to hell and murdering things. And I just thought that was funny that he put those two soundtracks out so close together and that sort of tonal whiplash. Like, what was it like to work on two such different games? So that's what I spoke to Cris about, and that's what we're going to hear next. How did you first collide with video games? And was that the same time you started composing for them, or did you come to video games earlier in your youth and then later when you'd sort of become a scoring composer that you came back to them?
This is a difficult question because for sure it's going to age me. I was a gamer for sure growing up, and in fact so much so that we didn't get an Atari or anything in the house because my parents saw the writing on the wall and they're like, oh boy, no, you need to get outside and do some stuff. But for sure, I had like a Commodore 64 with the fast load cartridge, and loved games. I fell in love with this game called The Bard's Tale. That was kind of my first RPG that I really got into. And then I kind of gave him up for a while in kind of high school and early college, and that I didn't even get into music until I was about 21. I did get accepted into a bunch of composition programs, and I wound up going to UCLA. And I thought I wanted to do like film and TV, specifically film, and specifically, I want to do the next Star Wars if if John is unavailable. and and I was doing like a lot of like student films, and everyone's like, oh, you got to find your Spielberg early on, and you both come up the ranks together, and I tried doing that, and I just couldn't find anybody that really clicked with the style of music that I wanted to write, which was that kind of over-the-top melodic orchestral sound. And somebody was like, hey, did you check out this game called, I think it was called Outcast? I was like, no, I haven't really played games in a while. And my friend said, dude, you got to check it out. Like, the score is unbelievable. It was recorded with a live orchestra. And I'd been out of the loop in games for a while. And I was like, oh my God, like, last I remembered, it was all that kind of chiptune, 8-bit stuff, and which didn't really appeal to me. I listened to the score that was written by Lenny Moore, and he became my instant like video game music hero. Like, I couldn't believe the quality that this guy was doing, and like recorded in Moscow with the orchestra and choir, and I mean it sounded very space epic-y, Star Wars kind of. And from that moment on, I was like, okay, shifting gears. I want to write for video games. I was going to UCLA, and I was still in my program at the time, just getting ready to graduate. And I was like, okay, I know what I want to do. I feel like I've got a handle on kind of what will become my style of writing. But it seems like school forgot one important thing, and that was like, how do you get a job? How do I convince somebody to pay me to write music? That's the biggest question. How do you get that? And I was joking with my publicist Greg the other day, saying, people ask me that all the time. How do you get into games? And I say, well, you're going to have to read my book, How to Get Struck by Lightning. It's not easy. It's, right place, right time for music, or wrong place, wrong time for lightning. So I got scared. I actually tried to stay in school and get like my master's and doctorate in music, and for no other reason than it'll postpone the real world for a few years. I already owe so much money in student debt. What's another $100K?
Yeah.
The school, the head of the music department, he said, rumor is you want to write music for video games, and we consider that to be low art.
They actually said that to you in those terms, or?
He literally said low art. It stuck with me. For your local PROs, your performing rights organizations, you open up a publishing company for yourself, and my publishing company is called Low Art Music.
Brilliant.
I got my degree. They said don't come back. And then it took me like 6 years to land my first professional composition gig for a game. Yeah, it was tough. It was a major struggle. And it was like, okay, let me just work all these jobs. I did everything from every restaurant job to roofing houses to I cleaned out wells in a forest, all kinds of stuff. And then 6 years later, then at night I would come home and it's like, okay, let me work on my portfolio. And I got to put out, these demo CDs. Like, who do I send these to? Who's going to listen to them? And then, so yeah, fast forward 6 years, still no real inroads into this business at all. But I had an agent that took me on very early in my career, even though I didn't really have the credits to be that enticing to him. But his name was Bob Rice. He actually just passed recently. But he was my first agent, my biggest mentor. And he calls me out of the blue one day. Like I would call him, every few months, be like, "Hey, Bob, it's Cris Velasco. Do you remember me? I'm looking for a job." And so he calls me one day and he's like, "Okay, I just heard about this project. It's for Battlestar Galactica." And this is prior to the show, before they did a reboot. This was like old school Battlestar. I watched Battlestar Galactica when I was a little kid with my mom. That was like our thing. She was really into sci-fi. I was like, oh my God, this is meant to be. This has got to be my first gig. Like, I'm totally going to get this. And so at the time I was working as a telemarketer. So Bob tells me they need your demo by like 5 p.m. today. It's like 9 a.m. in the morning. I was like, oh my God, I have to write something immediately. And so I went back and I listened to Stu Phillips' old theme and all the music, and I put together this suite. Or that was the plan. But I called into work and I was like, they knew I wanted to be a composer, not a telemarketer. And I said, hey, I've got this opportunity finally. I need the day off. And they said, nope, we need you to come right in. And so I said, well, I obviously quit. I stayed home. I told a few of my friends like what was happening. And they're like, what, are you crazy? You had a job. Like you can't just quit your job and pitch for this game. Like, they'd seen me struggling for 6 years and thought like, oh, Chris. But so I wrote this whole thing. I sent it off. And this is kind of back in the day. Like that never happens these days in the gaming industry. They wouldn't just put out a cattle call to like, hey, anybody who hears about this, like send us a demo. Like they would get inundated. Like they'd have 10,000 reels. I wrote my piece. I turned it in at like 4:30 p.m. I was like, whew, just under the wire. Got it in. I almost instantly got a phone call that said, like on the caller ID, it said Infogrames. And I'm like, oh my God, that's who's developing this. I couldn't believe it. Like I just sent it in. They called me. They loved it this much. So it was the audio director. And he's like, hey, we just got your demo. Like, man, it sounds so great. We absolutely love it. I have no idea who you are or how you found out about this. And we were not expecting a demo from you. So I just have to tell you, like, we hired somebody like 10 minutes ago. We thought we had all the pitches in, and we went with our favorite, not knowing that you were going to send something in. But we've already told him, like, it's a done deal, but we just really loved your stuff, so we wanted to tell you personally. It's like in the Simpsons, you know, the moment that guy's heart breaks. You could see the moment that my heart broke. And I said, oh, thank you. I know I just heard about it today. I was told I had till 5. He's like, well, you know, we loved it. We could see the passion you had for this. You know, for real, we're going to keep you on the radar for next time. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's great. And then the next day, I decided this industry is not for me. I've spent 6 years. Like, my own school told me it was low art. They kicked me out. Now the industry has, like, kicked me out for 6 years. I finally had a shot. I didn't get it. I don't know how long I can keep this going. So I started looking into culinary schools, and I was just going to go back to school and become a chef. As I'm looking online, I get another call from Infogrames, same guy, and he said, you know, I've been listening to your pitch all morning, and I just really love it, and I just know you'd be so great for this. I'm going to give you a shot, so we're giving you 1 cinematic to score. And it was like, I don't know, 2 minutes long, and I just thought, oh my God, I'm a professional composer. Like, with this 1 cinematic, I'm going to make enough money to pay my rent for the month. And so I put everything I had into that first cue, and they loved it. And then they gave me another one, and then another one, and another one. And they eventually wound up firing the composer they hired. They're like, Chris, we just want you to do the whole thing. So that was my first, it's hardly falling into it, the way I, like, struggled and clawed at the walls of the gaming industry to get in. A lot of these kind of, not really first wave of composers, maybe it was like second or third wave of composers kind of in games, which Enon was kind of leading the pack on that one. And so, yeah, we had the same agent, Bob, so did Rich Jakes. So we kind of all know each other, and we'll occasionally, like, all reach out, you know, if I didn't get a job, or if someone will reach out to me and be like, did you pitch on that? And be like, maybe. And then you kind of talk it out, like, I'm not giving you too much information, am I? And then eventually, you know, you find out you both pitched, and, like, either that guy got it or you got it, and it's just like, oh, okay, well, if I didn't get it, I'm glad you did, at least.
Friendly competition. Your credits list is incredible in terms of the work, but also the IP. I mean, Borderlands, Mass Effect, Fortnite, Assassin's Creed, God of War, Warhammer, a little game called Bloodborne, which everyone's forgotten about, obviously, Resident Evil, Star Wars. It's just an incredibly rich list of IP when you really sort of break it down. And I know some of those would have been bigger projects, and some of them would have been smaller projects, some of them with co-composers, some of them not. What are some of the things that you found stay the same when you approach either a famous IP that's pre-existing, or it's a new IP but it's going to be a big launch? What are some of the things that stay the same when you come to a project?
You just really want every project to have its own unique voice, and that's easier said than done, especially across similar IPs, like, you know, sci-fi. Although, I mean, like Star Wars, for me, Star Wars is John Williams. I know that with the TV shows and everything, they've kind of expanded the palette. But for me, it's John Williams, and it always will be. And that's what I did for Vader Immortal. I really tried to embrace that John Williams style that I just love so much. But obviously, it's different in, like, Mass Effect, but then things like Bloodborne and Resident Evil, and now Lords of the Fallen, and, like, those could be similar sounding scores. So I really spend a lot of time very early on working out what is the signature sound of this game. And even if it's just straight up orchestra, you know, there's so many things you can do with that. Like 2 of my recent ones, like Lords of the Fallen and Fae Farm. I mean, those are both orchestral, organic instruments, and, you know, they couldn't be further apart, really. I mean, absolute opposite ends of the spectrum. Yeah, you know, I just take each project as it comes, and I get really excited about each one, and I just kind of inundate myself in that world. And I don't know if it sounds silly or not, but I do imagine, like, okay, it's real. I'm in the world of, you know, Resident Evil or Mass Effect or Borderlands, and, you know, it's dusty, it's the desert. There's all these raiders out here with these crazy guns and 4-wheel drive trucks, and they're trying to kill me for some reason. I don't know why, but it's madness out there. And I just think, like, what is the soundtrack that plays in my head in these situations? Because honestly, I walk around my neighborhood. I take my neighbor's dogs for a walk, and I think that's kind of the curse of a composer. You've always got music playing in your head, and I'm like nonstop. It's I have to learn to tune it out really. But I'll be walking, and I'm almost like scoring my stroll through the canyon, and that's what I do for these games. I'm like, okay, if I was there, if I just landed my spaceship in this port, and I'm walking, and there's this bustling city, and like, what is the sound of that? And so yeah, I really try to almost like method act my way into the score, and like, what would I want to hear, or what do I hear, and not necessarily want to hear, but what's the vibe here now, and I do that with every project to try to get rid of the fluff and like just hone in, just laser beam in on like what is this game, what is the sound palette of this game.
The way you describe that, like actually trying to go to the place in your head, is such a brilliant way of thinking about it, and such an insight into the kind of creative mind that I almost wondered, like, how much can concept art add to that, where it was actually possibly all you need is just a simple evocative explanation from like the creative director maybe about what they want the player to feel, where they want them to visit. And then obviously at the far end of the project, it's presumably then it's just much more about details, like this has to be 2 bars shorter, can we bring the choir down in the mix, that kind of thing. What's your favourite stage of that process?
I think the beginning is kind of my favorite, that sort of exploration into figuring it out. And I try to start with a main theme always, because that kind of encapsulates the rest of the score. And then you, of course, want to use that theme elsewhere. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Actually, for Lords of the Fallen, the main theme was one of the very last pieces I wrote. And I think the reason that is because it was, in terms of gameplay, the least important, because we had all these mega boss fights, and it was like, okay, we need to get music in here and see how it's feeling. We got to get the pacing right. And so I was working on all this like combat and atmospheric stuff so we could get it into the game. And then it was like, oh yeah, let's do that main theme. But it's kind of like, well, feels like a bit of a missed opportunity, because I would have loved to have had that first and kind of thread it throughout the score. But I did a few cinematics after, and I definitely hinted at the theme in those.
It's fair to say, you've done a load of different stuff, but horror does seem to beckon you. The dark side of the universe does seem to sort of draw you in, and obviously all the art behind you suggests that that's an aesthetic that you really vibe with. If it's going to be a dark project, like a horror project, do you feel like that's a bit more personal to you, that you can get started quicker on something like that?
Yeah, I think the ideas just flow easier for me when it's kind of a horror genre. I've loved monsters since I was a very small kid. And in fact, my parents just brought me, they're like finally like cleaning out all the old closets, me and my sister's stuff. We still have like so much stuff over there. And some of it were boxes and boxes of drawings that I did as a kid, and every single one of them is a monster. And I mean, there's hundreds of monster pictures. I've just always been drawn to it. Not because I felt like, oh, I'm in a dark place, but I just thought, it's like, God, they're just so cool looking. Like, I love it. And then as I got a little bit older, adults always ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wanted to be an entomologist. Like, I thought insects were so cool looking. It's like, man, these are like monsters that live in our world. And if you like see a macro picture of any of these things, you're like, oh my God, that's more horrific than any alien you see on screen in a movie. And from there, I thought it'd be amazing to work in like the Jim Henson Creature Shop and like make monsters for a living. Now I've got a bunch of friends that do that in movies, and I'm like, oh man, you guys you're living my dream. And so yeah, this whole like thing of monsters and horror movies, from even as a little kid, like sneaking over to a friend's house and watching horror movies, and then having just terrible nightmares, but then going back for seconds, because it's like it's just a visceral feeling, and there's nothing like it. That being scared, not like, oh my god, like the freight train is kind of like I'm stalled on the train tracks. Not that kind of fear. I mean, that's obviously a whole other league, and I'm not into that kind of fear. But this Lovecraftian, eldritch horror, just monster, Stephen King, Clive Barker kind of stuff, like that it just really speaks to me on a profound creative level for some reason. And
there's fewer rules, aren't there, when you're creating monsters?
Well, you could literally do anything, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So there's sort of more open field to run into, and I guess you could sort of say the same about horror scoring. You could do more wacky things with crazy sounds and whatever you want to bang or squish around you.
Literally anything. I did a couple years ago this game called Carrion, and the score, one of the main sounds of the score was this little piece of slime. Like my friend's kids went through this phase. I guess a lot of kids did. They're like, oh, we're playing with slime. We've got this. You buy slime, and they would just just squish it. It was I don't know really the draw to squishing the slime was, but they had the slime, and I was like, man, the main character, the protagonist really is this big slime monster. Let me take this slime into the studio and record squishing it a bunch of ways, see if I can make an instrument out of it. And so I did. I spent a couple hours just at my friend's house. He's also a composer, so we went in his studio, borrowed the slime, squished it, recorded it, ran it through all kinds of plugins, and that slime noise was really the foundation of the whole Carrion score. So yeah, I mean, you could do anything, and it just totally works in horror.
And some of the cues in Lords of the Fallen, you get, is it some of the male vocalists, and they're sort of singing, I mean, it wouldn't matter to the player what language they were singing in, but it's the style, it's the whispering, and was that a lot of fun to do on this game?
Whispering is so creepy to me. Well, it's funny because there's this whole ASMR thing that everybody seems to be into lately, and including me. Like for me, it's super relaxing, and actually quiet whispering, like done in a pleasant way, is sort of tingle inducing.
Me too, yeah.
My wife is the opposite. She like absolutely loses it if she hears whispering. She's like, it's like nails on a chalkboard. But there's also something inherently scary about whispering. If the lights are out and there's just like this like chattering coming from somewhere. That's super creepy. So I wanted to use not the tingly ASMR whispers, but it could even be the same thing. It's just all the context. It's horror. So I used a boy soprano, which in a sacred setting in a church, singing for the Pope or something. I'm sure it's very beautiful and moving and a religious experience. And you put that into Lords of the Fallen, and suddenly it's just creepy as hell.
That's something that cuts across both you and Newt. It's actually something he said was that, the choir for thousands of years we associate with the church. And then in Hollywood, it becomes, with like films like The Omen, it becomes associated with the opposite of the church, which of course is with satanic, worship and the Antichrist and all of that kind of thing. But you have to kind of twist and pervert the uses of choir. to kind of achieve that. That, I think, is the most impressive element of the whole Lords of the Fallen score across both all of the material, is just the use of the voice in so many varied ways that keeps it super interesting and creepy and horrible and wonderful. But in this lovely wholesome game Fae Farm, which is the exact opposite, because Lords of the Fallen is dark and creepy, and there's the land of the dead, and everything looks disgusting, and the boss monsters, the design in the trailers looks incredible and horrible at the same time. But Fae Farm is what we call these days this kind of new genre, this kind of wholesome, cozy game where everything's very cartoony and colourful. When you got started on the project, how did the project come about? How did Mr. Horror get a wholesome, cozy game, and how did you land on a sort of small orchestral ensemble for the score?
So before I got started on Fae Farm, I write music now for all of the Phoenix Labs games, and I was working on some unannounced new IP stuff they're doing, and then they told me about Fae Farm, and Fae Farm started out as a little indie project internally there with like 2 to 5 people. I think it grew up to like 5 people. It started with 2 people just making this little game. Phoenix Labs like, well, I know you want to go make this like indie game, but why don't you just keep it here and we'll make it a Phoenix Labs game. But I don't think anybody ever expected that it was going to get as big as it has. It was just a skeleton crew, and then somebody internally kind of let someone from Nintendo see it, and Nintendo got very excited about Fae Farm, and suddenly it was all hands on deck. It was like, okay, we're making this game. It's going to be a Nintendo exclusive, and this could be huge for the company. And they're like, okay, Chris, we need you to do the music, because originally someone else, like one of the programmers, was doing the music. I was like, great, it's totally not in my wheelhouse. I'm not the cozy farming sim composer. And then I was told, like, no, Chris, this game is like really important for us, and we 100% need you to do the music. So I just jumped into it, and I've never played a farming game. During the whole COVID lockdown, I was tempted by Animal Crossing because everyone was playing it, and then I saw it and I went, I don't think it's for me. I understand that kind of warm hug of a game, like especially during COVID, it felt like, oh, I can just sit here and I can relax and I can just lose myself in this little cozy experience and feel good. So I specifically didn't go and listen to any of the other scores either. I was like, I want this to be my voice, and you guys tell me if it's hitting all the right spots for you. And of course it was like, well, it's kind of like an internal indie game, so do we have the budget to go like record a big orchestra? And it was like, probably not. And it's like, okay, so that was part of the choice of using a small ensemble, is just, budget wise. But then as I saw more of the game, I'm like, okay, this is not the vast world of Lords of the Fallen. There's a lot to explore in Fae Farm. It's actually a really deep game, but it doesn't have that kind of sense of scale that something like a Soulsborne would. So you just don't need that giant orchestra. You want to, I think the smaller the ensemble, it just has more of an intimate vibe to it anyways. And I think it gels really well with the game itself. And there's also a lot of like interior places in the game, and there's music playing in those. And, you don't want crazy big music in an interior shot anyways. It doesn't feel right. Something just feels out of whack. So it was 4, sometimes 5 strings, 4 woodwinds, and then I did make my professional debut as a whistler on one track. We were in the studio, and I had a part for whistling. I was like, okay, who's gonna go out there and whistle it? And nobody would do it. And I'm asking people, I'm like, hey, can you whistle? And most people were like, nah, not really. And like, how'd you go your whole life without whistling? That's weird.
Not a big roster of LA session whistlers then.
Not at my session. So I just went out. I was like, well, I can do it. And I went out and whistled the melody into the mic out there, and it was super fun. But I felt that pressure. I've never been a recording musician before, a session player, so I'm not used to having the headphones on and hearing the click track and like seeing the red light turn on, and then suddenly what's so easy is like just whistling. Now it's like, oh, like, can I get some water? Like, yeah. Oh no, I forgot how to whistle.
You got red light fever. I've had that before as a player. It completely changes the pressure of like sitting on a stage and playing whatever instrument. Completely changes in a booth, and there's something really oppressive about headphones and trying to express yourself through an instrument or your vocal cords.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would do a take, and to me it sounded pretty good, and I'm just kind of waiting, and they're like, okay, here we go again. I was like, wait, well, was that not good? Like, what was wrong with it? And my orchestrator is in the booth, and he's like, I said, can you give me some feedback? He's like, just do it better. And and I told him, like, oh, so that's how it feels when everybody's out here. And we just tell them, like, no specific feedback, just better.
Yeah, the boot's on the other foot this time. I think a small ensemble, because the camera angle of Fae Farm, actually, thinking about it, something you said about, Soulsborne, Lords of the Fallen, the big vast world. I mean, AAA games, they want players to see the horizon. They want players to see the gigantic castle with the tower of light, ascending to the heavens. Whereas I think there is something to the idea that cozy games are very much focused in on the player and their immediate surroundings, just from the camera angle going down. So actually, in that sense, an intimate ensemble makes perfect sense, because I think Grant Kirkhope did a pretty big orchestra for Viva Pinata back in the noughties. That's a real favourite kind of cozy soundtrack of mine. But
yeah, it's a great soundtrack.
I mean, he was going for sort of that English bucolic, countryside feel to that one. But I think Fae Farm feels even more intimate than that. But it's so funny hearing, a cue like More of Faith. And then I was listening to a song for Eddie, which is just like intimate piano, lots of major seventh chords. Was there any overlap composing these projects?
There was, yeah. I would wake up in the morning and have my coffee, come into the studio, and be like really happy to work on Fae Farm. It's just once I got into that mindset of major chords and cozy and small ensemble and just quaint, and I really got into it. Like it's like, hey, I feel like I've been missing out on something. Like like I was like colorblind, and now it's like, oh my God, I can see red and green. Like, this is amazing. So I really had a lot of fun, and I would look forward to waking up and writing music every day. And then at night, I would go have dinner with my wife and chill out a little bit. And and then come into the studio for, some late night composing, and then I'd have, my glass of wine or scotch, and I've like the lights are all out, and I put the, the mood lighting on, and the you can see the moon like out my window, and now it's like it's time for Lords of the Fallen. And it was just separating it by like times of day actually worked out well for me.
That sounds like a brilliant way to do it. In terms of what players are actually doing in these games moment to moment, Lords of the Fallen, quite obviously, you are murdering things, in fantasy things in dark realms and whatever, and some exploration and treasure hunting. But generally speaking, you are surviving and dodging and hacking and slashing. And then the games like Animal Crossing, Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley, and which, Fae Farm is of the lineage, they give you a lot of verbs, actually. It's always chopping down trees at first, but then it's romancing, the local townspeople and doing cute things and fishing and this kind of thing. When you're actually sitting and composing, how much do you personally think about what the player is doing moment to moment, what's happening in their hands on the pad? Or are you going more on vibes and feel, and you'll kind of worry about that kind of how it fits directly into the game later when you're actually going to start bouncing it back and forth with the audio team?
Yeah, for Fae Farm, I 100% was just about the vibe. So I knew like, okay, there's this like marketplace, and you go and you buy seeds, and then you plant them, and then you go back and you sell flowers, and so we wanted that music to be a little more upbeat and like, hey, we're doing something, we're in a bustling little town, and so I mean, still very charming and cozy, but I wasn't at all thinking about like where you might go from there. It was strictly vibe. And then the audio director, this guy Dorian Paris, he was implementing everything and would, totally tell me like, oh, that feels great for this. But then you go over here and you do some fishing. Like, can we get some music for like just this area? Or there's like a fairy forest, and that's kind of the only, well, other than the combat, it's the only time I kind of dip my toe into a minor key for Fae Farm. And I wanted that to be kind of, fairy, but like in a Tchaikovsky sort of way. For something like Fae Farm, where it's very open world and just kind of task driven, it would kind of make me crazy to try to micromanage, like thinking like, oh, you're chopping trees, so it's this music, or you're watering your crop, it's this music. And
you alluded to with Lords of the Fallen that because the music doesn't actually play when you're in the world, it plays mainly around events and boss fights and cutscenes, that kind of thing. So was there quite a lot of detail paid to like, what's this boss, what kind of boss fights it's going to be, what kind of tempo?
Totally. Yeah, so that one I did get like video of gameplay for each of the bosses, and that Maw of Faith one is actually one of my favorite bosses, one of my favorite cues to write and listen to, actually. But oh man, that thing looks amazing. I'm sure you've seen video or pictures of it. It's just the one with teeth everywhere. But no, I would like definitely watch these videos, get the pacing, get the scale of the creature. Like, I feel like video game music over the years some of them get a bit of a bad rap. And I think that because since we're not writing to picture and often not writing to anything except our own imagination, it doesn't make sense always to like suddenly change meter and change key and do something off the wall, where in a movie it might make perfect sense. You're like, oh, Indiana Jones just swung on his whip across this chasm, so we just, we went action, like, da da da, and then, then back to action again, and that just doesn't naturally happen in a game. But I think that's what makes movie music like super interesting, is how it always changes to fit the picture. So I was kind of scoring to picture even though I knew that the player's experience was going to be completely different from my video of these bosses, but I was like, okay, he just like scuttled backwards into the shadows, and I had that help me direct the flow of the music. And so that's why I'm like throwing in meter changes all over the place. And I never wanted to get into that kind of video game, like loopable, like, oh, here's this section, this 4 bars does this. And, and it's always percussion, like driving. And if the percussion stays too samey, it's like, okay, this is starting to get a little bit boring for me personally. I think a lot of times music starts out with a kind of a groove in mind, and then you write to that. And I did it the opposite way. Like, I used percussion sparingly and only to really accent things that I wanted accented. And I wanted the orchestra to provide all of the momentum and the excitement instead of reverse. And I think that helped make the score feel more interesting, feel a little more like what's happening here, maybe a little more intense and scary while you're actually playing it, because you can't really settle into like, oh, it's this groove, like I get it. I wanted it to really keep you on your toes because these monsters are so scary in the game, and I just felt like it would be a disservice to these cool monsters to like make the music feel boring.
Well, they are your speciality. Lords of the Fallen is more on the Dark Souls path of you're in this boss arena, you're not going to wander off, like this is what you're doing at this moment, this is how the boss behaves.
I did, for most of the bosses, we did have kind of a phase 1, phase 2 sort of thing. And I did do a little like connectors to go between. So phase 1 can loop all on its own. And then when you get to whatever happens in the fight where it's going to go to phase 2, the audio engine will say like, play this like little connective stinger thing and then go to phase 2. And then when you or the monster dies, we've got the kind of end stinger. They did have to go in and tempo map and stuff. And I eventually just had to give them my MIDI files because they were trying, I know one of the audio directors was trying to like figure out like, okay, what is this? There's a few tracks that are especially over excited with the meter changes. And I know they were not complaining to me at all, but they're like, ooh, Chris, this is really hard to figure out. So if you could just give us the MIDI file, like, then no problem. We'll just drop it in and we'll know what it is. And
you can imagine being in a metal band and like the guitarist brings in, a riff that's like 13/8 and then 11/8 and the drummer's just like, oh man. But it all works out in the end. Those are the things that caught my ear, while listening to the soundtrack. Outside of the game, I thought that was some of the most exciting stuff and really helped set it apart, honestly, from other dark fantasy scores that I've listened to in recent years. So from a personal perspective, I think it was definitely job done. Okay, we're going to move on to Done in 60 Seconds. We've got a minute to recommend each other something, and hope that the other person wants to take a listen. I'm going to go first. Matt, I swear I'm not just doing this because it all ties into the interview and everything. I was listening to the Lords of Fallen soundtrack. I fell in love with it, genuinely fell in love with it. I thought it was fantastic, kind of dark fantasy, very operatic, the whole thing. I think it's some of the best work I've heard from either of these two composers who worked on it, Cris Velasco and Knut Avenstrop Haugen. And Knut's tracks, boss tracks, Anathema, Phase 1 and 2, I thought they are just totemic, they're towering, they're just amazing, gets the blood pumping, it's that kind of boss music, but it's melodic and I just love it. Maybe because I've been singing in a choir lately, I'm just got choral things on the brain. But if this doesn't get the blood stirring, I don't know what will. So let's give a listen to Anathema.
while we were listening to that, you said, I know what you're going to say. I think there's two things. Right, so here's the two things that I think you thought I was going to say. One, I was getting like an angry John Williams thing, I think.
It's Duel of the Fates, Carmina Burana, Liberi Fatali, the Final Fantasy VIII piece. It is in that mould, absolutely, 100%.
So this is the thing. This is the thing about the Lords of the Fallen soundtrack, right? Because I am not saying the music in the Souls games is bad by any means. It's not. But there is music that is maybe well written and enjoyable to listen to. And then there is music that is well written and maybe serves a very good purpose within the context of the game that is not enjoyable to listen to. Do you know what I mean? Like Soul soundtracks, I'm not going to sit back and do some work and go, yeah, I'll just crack on the first boss theme from Dark Souls 1. That'll be a nice thing to have in the background. Whereas some of the tracks in Lords of the Fallen, they're actually, do you know what I mean? There's some light in the darkness.
Yes,
which I guess fits with the themes of the game and the whole jumping between the two worlds and stuff. But it is a great soundtrack, and I think, considering the Souls comparisons, I would say the music in Lords of the Fallen, for me personally, is way better than anything I've listened to in the Souls games.
So, Matt, what have you got for me? Let's get you going for 60 seconds.
When we talk about 3D platformers, most people talk about two titles specifically. They talk about Super Mario 64 and they talk about Banjo-Kazooie. Both 3D platformers on the Nintendo 64 and both very good. But there is another platform, lesser known, from Japan, that is right up there with both of them, if not maybe even higher. That is Mystical Ninja starring German, best known as the Japanese IP Gambari German. It's a lovely, funny 3D platformer with one of the most wild story plots ever. I just wanted to share this piece of music from the game's first town because as far as melody goes, I think it's perfect. And I want to hear as a newcomer how you might feel listening to this, going in fresh without having that experience of the game.
Well, look, the thing is, I don't really have any nostalgia as a single-player gamer for the Nintendo 64. So I'm not that kind of familiar with the sound fonts, the limitations that composers were working on under with that particular console. But I know people who are head over heels for this game in particular, this soundtrack in particular. I mean, that was cheeky, it's cheery, it's bouncy, it's I might not stick that on my favourite of all time music playlist, but I'm happy to have heard it once. What's the significance of it to you?
So one played that through with Zach quite a lot, who did the music for this podcast, was the best man at our wedding. We grew up playing video games together. So I think something there, sentimental, but that is also the main theme for the game, which is just reworked into the town theme, and then snippets of that are just used in different places. So I feel like you need to play the game to look at the context of the music and how it's used. But man, as far as earworms go, do you know what I mean? People talk about the music in Banjo-Kazooie and Super Mario 64 getting stuck in your head. As soon as you've spent maybe an hour with Mystical Ninja starring German, those songs are not leaving. Like, they are with you forever now. You are not going to shake them. And they use quite a lot of the same melodies as well in previous Mystical Ninja games. So some of the songs in that were in the Game Boy titles and SNES before that. But if there's anyone listening who hasn't played Mystical Ninja starring German and you love 3D platformers, you love Mario 64, you love Banjo-Kazooie, basically anything on the Nintendo 64, go out there and find a way to play this game because it is incredible.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for on the GXM podcast. Thanks so much for joining us as we explore the intersection between video games and music. Please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on your podcast service of choice, especially Apple Podcasts. That really does help other people find the show. Obviously, the more positive the review, the better, really. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram and Threads at GXM Podcast. I'm at T Quillfeldt on Twitter. That's TQILLFELDT. Mat is Mat Ombler on Twitter. That's Mat with only one T, Ombler, OMBLER. If you have any feedback, hit us up at gxmpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. The show was produced by both of us. It was edited by me, TQ, and music was by Zach Foster. Thanks very much again to Cris Velasco for joining us and to Greg O'Connor-Reid for helping set that up.